Today on Tiny Voices, we're going to look at some of the pitfalls of market research. Trust me, it's a lot more exciting than it sounds. That and more today on Tiny Voices. When you take a multi-billion-dollar company whose revenue is generated by a relatively small number of mega hits, it's not really surprising when that company acts as risk-averse as possible. But what happens when that risk aversion is used to justify stifling innovation? Going by tradition and doing what traditionally works is an argument often made by publishers in defense of not taking chances. Focus testing is often criticized for being a tool of confirmation bias. You focus test expecting an explicit outcome and then adjust the parameters of the test until the outcome suits your hypothesis. Well-known publisher Activision was accused of this by way of an article on Gamasutra written by Leigh Alexander. The article alleges that according to multiple employees working on a game titled Black Lotus, their project was the victim of a formula driven by an over-reliance on focus testing. Black Lotus was eventually killed off and resurrected as True Crime Hong Kong, barely recognizable from the rather bold Black Lotus. Traditional thinking dictates that female leads cannot move copies of games. This is partially why Black Lotus, whose main character was inspired by Lucy Liu, was changed to a male lead when the project was eventually resurrected as True Crime Hong Kong. Co-creative director of The Last of Us Neil Druckmann had to contend with this traditionalist thinking from Sony. Sony was concerned about Ellie's status as a female main character. They intended to test their premise with an all-male focus group, which just sounds like a recipe for confirmation bias. Druckmann had to push specifically for the research firm Sony had tapped to conduct the focus testing to include female gamers. Naughty Dog was also asked to relegate Ellie to the back of the box for quote-unquote marketing purposes, a request that Druckmann refused unequivocally. As an aside, do you remember Bioshock Infinite's cover and how it only featured Booker DeWitt? Same issue there. It was thought that the game would be more appealing to their target demographic if Elizabeth, a central character, was not featured on the cover. Ken Levine defended the decision by saying, "We went and did a tour around to a bunch of frat houses and places like that. People who were gamers, not people who read IGN, and we said, so have you guys heard of Bioshock? Not a single one of them had heard of it. And we live in this very special, Bioshock is a reasonably successful franchise, right? Our gaming world, we sometimes forget, is so important to us, but there are plenty of other products that I buy that I don't spend a lot of time thinking about. My salad dressing. If there's a new salad dressing coming out, I would have no idea. I use salad dressing. I don't read salad dressing weekly. I don't care who makes it. I don't know any of the personalities in the salad dressing business." Yeah. Anyway, I want to get back to how this line of thinking influences not just petty things like box art, but core game design tenets. Horizon Zero Dawn, a new RPG by Guerrilla, the studio best known for Killzone, was unveiled at E3 2015 to massive buzz. Sony's president of worldwide studios, Shuhei Yoshida, later did an interview with Polygon, and he revealed that he was nervous and excited to see how people would respond. One of the reasons that he cited for his nervousness was the game's female main character. He said, quote, "That's always been the vision by the team, but we had a discussion. Is it risky to do a female character?" End quote. So they did some pretty rigorous focus testing, and as a swerve from what we've seen so far, their feedback from the focus groups was mostly positive. And yet, even with all of that focus testing, Yoshida still said that he was nervous about the game's female lead. This is the genesis of this whole episode, right there. When I first saw that interview, I thought to myself, what's the good of focus testing if you lack confidence in it when the results don't support your preconceived notions? Moving on, publishers sneered at Don't Nod's Remember Me because, again, they were worried that the female main character would reduce the game's sales potential. That one is actually an even deeper rabbit hole than you think, because in an interview with Eurogamer, it was revealed that the team, quote, wanted to be able to tease on Nillin's private life, Nilin being the main character, by the way, and that means, for instance, at one point we wanted a scene where she was kissing a guy. We had people tell us, you can't make a dude like the player kiss another dude in the game, that's gonna feel awkward. Also, Don't Nod might sound a little bit familiar to you because of another game that they recently put out, Life is Strange, a game in which they also ran into that same gender concern with the main characters. Quote, Square is basically the only publisher that didn't want to change a single thing about the game. We had other publishers telling us to make it a male lead character. Now, if you want to do some reading on whether or not there's any merit to the argument that female lead characters reduce sales potential, check the links in the description. The Cliff Notes version is that games with female leads are often given drastically lower marketing budgets, and thus they kind of get set up to fail. Again, confirmation bias and self-fulfilling prophecies. And believe it or not, even though it's been a running theme up until now, gender diversity in games isn't the core of this topic. It's much more broadly about how improper use of market research reinforces traditional risk-averse tactics in publishing. Gender representation just happens to be a really common victim of the pitfalls that you fall into with that line of thinking. Let's do one more. Fuse, once known as Overstrike, is emblematic of the hazards of bad market research and focus grouping. The game was initially revealed as a stylized, humorous, lighthearted co-op shooter. When it re-emerged down the line after a long period of radio silence from Insomniac, it was not only sporting a new name in Fuse, it was a brown, self-serious military shooter. Why the drastic change? I'll let Fuse's creative director explain that himself. Quote, "The game started out with a much more stylized and campy direction. We were actually going for something on the level of Ratchet & Clank, except with humans. Maybe it was going to appeal to gamers who we thought at the time might be in their late teens. The industry's changed quite a bit. We should focus test the game in front of a lot of gamers and get their opinion. These are the people that regularly play PlayStation 3 and Xbox games. We started to discover that everyone thought this was a game for their younger brother. We would hear this from 12-year-olds, so we decided that we needed to make a game that had an older appeal." End quote. So what happened when Fuse re-emerged as Overstrike, sporting this brand new vision? Well, press enthusiasm turned to malaise, the game came out and was received as a mediocre shooter, it was quickly forgotten about, interest in it quickly evaporated. Basically, Fuse let focus groups dictate the direction their game took, and the market did not reward them with the sales numbers that they were expecting to garner from the move. 14 years ago at D.I.C.E, Mark Cerny acknowledged many of the pitfalls of focus groups that publishers and marketing firms still fall into today.
Here are some of the great things you can learn from a focus test. What's popular? Ask what kind of game is hip right now, and the best you can hope for is to find out what was popular the moment before your group came into the room. Unless you are planning on releasing your game within the next few weeks, this information is all but useless to you.
In his speech, he emphasized that gameplay testing and focus groups should not upend the original vision for something, but rather tweak how it's conveyed. The overarching idea that a developer sets out with should remain intact through focus grouping and gameplay testing, but you fine-tune the nitty-gritty details based on the feedback you receive. Are people getting stuck? How and where? You iterate, you retest. That's how Jonathan Blow tested The Witness. He never let the market research feedback upend what he wanted to do with The Witness. Now, this may have all sounded like a long-winded way of saying that publishers suck, they're stuck in their ways, focus groups are useless, market research kills innovation, but that's not at all the point that I'm trying to make here. What I'm trying to get at is that there are pitfalls to aggressive market research, and it's easy to fall into them and lose your game's design in the process. But not every publisher, developer, or market research firm has to, and indeed some of them see the utility in these kinds of tools. Valve, for instance, makes extensive use of playtesting to balance their games and guide how they solve problems during development. In fact, they've even made a PDF available online that details their methodology, which focuses on empirical data rather than subjective focus group feedback. But even focus groups have their place. I'll quote David Rabin of Frontier Studios here. Quote, "There's a lot of rubbish spoken about focus groups, particularly in relation to political parties, where people see them as a way of abdicating responsibility for something. There's a lot of sneering. But you have to make sure that people don't get confused or hung up on the user interface or the instructions and that the game is not using buzzwords." End quote. Frontier's Wallace and Gromit is a game that Rabin says was improved by focus tester feedback. They were making a game for kids, and they focus grouped with kids in mind. What they found was that the kids they were using in their focus group weren't understanding an early puzzle in the game, so they iterated and gave clearer hints and indications about how to solve that puzzle. They wouldn't have even known about the puzzle difficulty problem if not for the focus group. So again, focus groups and playtesting are tools. You can use a hammer to strike down a nail, or you can use it to bash open a window. It's all about application. That's going to do it for this week's Tiny Voices. Today's topic morphed pretty radically from what I initially envisioned it as due to a number of outside circumstances, and that caused a pretty hefty delay in putting it out. Next week's episode should be right on time though, and we're going to be talking about how a bug becomes a feature. Thanks for watching, everyone. See you next time.